This is session 3 of our Stewards Summer School titled Dealing with Difficult Supervisors and Management Tactics. My name is Justice Wornum. I am a shop steward in training at PCC Community Markets, Seattle, Washington, that is. I'm a member of UFCW Local 3000, and I'm also on the International Organizing Committee for Essential Workers for Democracy. Today is the third training, as I mentioned, in our five-week training series of the Stewards Summer School. The next training will be coming up on Sunday, August 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time, so add that to your calendar. But today we're going to go through some strategies for dealing with difficult supervisors and difficult management tactics. Before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Essential Workers for Democracy. EWD, or EW4D, is a national network of rank-and-file UFCW members like myself. We organize to enforce our contract and build stronger unions from the bottom up. You know, we love our unions, and that's why we're fighting for more transparency and more member democracy in our union. EWD is a member organization. That means we are funded with dues. Dues are $30 a year or $15 for part-time. And I joined EWD back, I guess a couple months ago now, because I wanted to be a part of a movement of union members who are ready to fight for more workers everywhere. You also can become a dues-paying member at ew4d.org/join. Next slide, please. In today's training, we're going to be going through some different types of traits and different types of managers. We're going to be talking about sort of your basic union rights when dealing with difficult supervisors, and then also going through some of those management tactics. And then in the end, we're going to drop out into some different breakout groups to practice out some scenarios, get our hands, engaged, our minds active. But first, I'm going to pass it off to Caitlin, who's going to help lead our training today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justice. So I'm Caitlin. I am a organizer for Essential Workers for Democracy. I live in New York, but I travel all across the country, meeting with members like yourselves who are organizing on the shop floor to enforce the contract, to build a stronger union from the bottom up, and to take on some difficult supervisors and troubling management tactics. So today we're going to go through a couple of different scenarios. We'll have time to practice dealing with difficult supervisors, although of course, I'm sure very few people need practice hearing from a difficult supervisor. So let's get started just by brainstorming some qualities of difficult supervisors. So you can raise your hand or type in the chat. What are some of the different kind of qualities of difficult supervisors? What makes someone a difficult supervisor? I'm actually going to be taking notes on these little sticky notes. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself, shout it out, or I'll also be checking the chat. I see passive aggressive. Someone else said, two people said passive aggressive at the same time. The passive aggressive, micromanaging, constantly violating the contract, fragile ego, doesn't respect you, disrespect, fragile ego, disregards your information and opinion, doesn't listen. We're gonna add more sticky notes. Doesn't care. Oh, harassing or sexually harassing. Yeah, that's a very bad quality of a supervisor. Refusal to admit when they're in the wrong. Acts like we're numbers, not people. Emotionally, a couple of people said emotionally manipulative or fake. That's a good one. So there's Nepo baby. Do as I say, not as I do. Laura said not understanding special needs workers. Poor communication, weaponized incompetence. That's a good one too. This seems cathartic for many of you. Lies or untruthful. Double standards. Yeah. I'll add another. Oh, Mark has a good one. Treats other workers differently, gossips about other workers to cause division. We've got a ton here. Some people in the chat are also saying racist or bigoted. Okay, I think that we could possibly continue doing this for another hour. But for the sake of the training, we've got a ton here. And lucky for us, a lot of what you guys have shared fits actually quite nicely into these different types or different traits of supervisors. So there may be different categories that we can think of when we think about difficult supervisors. And a lot of the comments that you guys shared um, you can think about, where this might fall in. So first up, we have the avoider. It's someone who avoids responsibility and decisions. They use silence to delay or stall progress. So that might be someone that's always saying, I would love to help you, but that's above me. I'm not able to do anything about that. Then we've got the know-it-all. So someone who's overconfident, they pretend to know more than they do. They're dismissive of differing opinions. Um, and then we've got the pessimist. So someone who's constantly focusing on the negative, spreading a defeatist attitude. They're offering no solutions. So maybe going back to what some people were saying in the chat, they're quite narrow-minded. Okay. And then there's another handful of different types of difficult supervisors. So the next one, we've got the aggressor. So loud, intimidating, and prone to outbursts when they're frustrated. They're using aggression to dominate conversation. So some people, we're sharing in the chat, maybe your supervisor might be racist or bigoted. They might be aggressive towards certain groups of people, whether they're doing that directly to members' faces or behind their backs. That might also go into, what Angela was saying, playing the blame game, fragile ego, what Justice is saying. Um, there's also like the aggressor, and then there's maybe we can add like a subcategory of the passive aggressor. So they might not be outright aggressive towards the members, especially if you're working in grocery, you're working really closely with your management all day long, or on the day to day, you have to see them all the time. So they might not be like outright aggressive towards you, but they might be really, really passive aggressive. And then next, we've got the manipulator. So sneaky and deceitful, undermining trust through lies or manipulation. So that's what a lot of people put in the chat, people that are lying or maybe two-faced. I think some people just actually said manipulative. Yeah, I see Gus put emotionally manipulative. Then there's the overcommitter. So they commit to tasks and promises, but they fail to deliver due to lack of follow through. So maybe this is someone that's saying like, oh, I'm working on it. I'll fix it. I'll get right on it. And then, weeks go by, you don't hear anything and you are following up with them. You're like, hey, what happened to this? And they're like, oh my God, I completely forgot. I'm so sorry. I'll get right on it. And they just go through that cycle over and over and over again and nothing gets done. And so there's no difference, in the end result for the members between the overcommitter and the aggressor. Like the overcommitter can be super nice to you and just promising in the future that they're going to do it, but that they never follow through. So the same problems just keep coming up over and over again. And then the last supervisor we're going to talk about is the bestie. So I think this is more common in grocery retail. Someone who tries to befriend the members but fails ultimately to address the workplace issues. And they hope that being nice will make people get over it. So this sometimes can have some crossover with the manipulator, right? They might use emotional manipulation to kind of appeal to like, oh, I thought we were friends. I thought we were a family. Act like they are your best friend and they want the best for you, and that they are just trying to look out for you. But at the end of the day, they're protecting their bottom line, and the problems that the members are trying to address are falling through the cracks. Okay, so we've all had supervisors who show different faces, and they might go through or cycle through these different types all in one day or all in one week. They might start out like the avoider and then become the manipulator. They might start out like the pessimist and then become the know-it-all. But understanding your supervisor's motivations and their approach, different approaches they might take to problems, is going to help tailor your responses to them and develop your interactions to get the best possible outcomes and make sure that the results you can get for you and your coworkers to make your workplace better. We're going to go through a couple of different strategies for countering these management tactics. But whether it's on the shop floor or in the union office, or sorry, in the management's office, you should know your contract and know your union rights. A lot of what we're covering today is about talking to supervisors when you're in the office, like when if you're a steward, if you're representing a member in a disciplinary meeting or an investigatory meeting, or if you're having a level one grievance meeting or step one grievance meeting with management, you're taking an issue to them in the office. There are a couple of different ways that we might be on the offensive or we might go on the defensive. So if you are a member on the shop floor and you think that a supervisor is out of line for one reason or another, you should know when it's time to ask for a steward. We're going to talk in just a second about wine garden rights. But that we have different ways of enforcing the contract and protecting members on the job. So when we're going on the offense, that might be when management is violating the contract. It might be when we're having a level one meeting to try and stop a problem, or it might be filing a grievance if the problem doesn't stop. And then there's also that stewards and active members are the line of defense, or that we're going on the defense. So that might be when management is harassing a member. I know some people in the chat were talking about sexual harassment or racism that people might be experiencing from management. That might be as a steward or an active member, making sure that you're documenting everything, that you have dates, times, locations, witnesses, and that you're educating all of your coworkers and every member in your store about their wine garden rights and how to invoke their wine garden rights, so that every member, I think that we want to get to a point where it's not just the stewards that are thinking about the offensive line and the defensive line in the workplace, but every member in your store is thinking about how we can defend the contract or enforce the contract, and how we can defend members from unfair discipline and harassment and poor treatment from management, so that everyone in your store is working together to enforce the contract, to file grievances when contract violations are happening, and to protect each other and build solidarity between each other, to take on issues when management brings them up. So I'm now going to pass it back to Justice, who's going to walk us through some wine garden rights information.
All right. Yes. Thank you. And yes, and just keep in mind, as we're talking about wine garden rights, this is usually, it's a defensive strategy, but it can be a crucial part to your offensive strategy, because what you're hearing in this meeting doesn't have to stay just in this meeting, right? That can be a part of understanding the bigger picture. So first thing is everybody who has a union has wine garden rights, but under most contracts, you have to actually invoke your wine garden rights and specifically use that term or request a union representative as it's happening. So the worker needs to know how to request a steward, otherwise they're not going to get one. They have to be able to assert their right to their wine garden representative, or they're not going to get one. If you are forced into a meeting without a wine garden rep, you just need to keep deflecting and say, I will answer your question as soon as I have a wine garden. Constantly bring it back to that. So management doesn't actually have to inform people that their interview or their meeting is potentially disciplinary. And so people may not know that this is, you can get totally blindsided. So you kind of have to train people to know, okay, as you're being drawn it for any reason, your meeting, again, there are so many different types of managers. Your manager might just be talking with you, chatting it up, being like, oh, do you have a moment? And then you're just like, do you have to say it? Am I possibly being disciplined for this meeting? Could anything I say in this meeting affect my working conditions? And then they have to say yes or no. And if no, then it's not going to be that kind of a meeting, and you have to hold them to that. But if so, you have the right for a wine garden rep. So once you invoke your wine garden rep, you have first, they have to stop asking any kind of questions until the union rep is there. Again, sometimes they do, but you don't have a right, or you don't have to answer them unless the union rep is there. They have to stop any kind of interview that's going on. They have to give the employee the right to continue or end the interview. Again, without a steward, you should not be continuing an interview. When a management or some agent of management asks a question outside of the normal instructions in which a worker could possibly have discipline, that's when you know you need a wine guard. Is this going to affect my working conditions? If so, you have a wine guard. If they don't use that terminology, it can cause them problems later on. Okay, caucusing. Now, when you're in a meeting and you have your wine garden rep, I mean, many things can happen in this meeting. Usually as a wine garden rep, I mean, you'll have training if you're a steward about kind of what you can do or what you shouldn't do, etc. But whenever, first of all, if anything is kind of you're sitting across from your coworker and they're saying some things that you would not say and would not recommend they say, that is a great opportunity to call a caucus, But you also have a caucus opportunity before the meeting. And I think this is a good opportunity to kind of reset everybody so that, going in there, because there's this kind of power relationship, right? And sometimes people are intimidated. You want to be able to go in there on the right terms. So first, call a caucus, ask, how are you feeling? That's always what the first thing I ask is like, how are you feeling right now? Where are you at mentally, etc. What's kind of coming up, and then we can talk about that one-on-one first, so that when we go into the meeting with the boss, that's hopefully not going to be too obvious, right? Because you'd never want to just perfectly portray exactly what's going on in your mind to your boss. Okay, time spent in your caucus, you can use that to share information about what's going on. Like maybe this is part of a bigger pattern. That's a great opportunity for that to come up in a kind of caucus, and kind of prepare your strategy, your game plan once you're going into that meeting again. And just constantly using the caucuses can actually really throw the boss out of their pacing. Because the boss has this is the thing about any kind of disciplinary meeting, the boss has thought about this meeting well in advance before the worker has ever known about it. So they have the advantage going in. It's like the chess game, white moves first, right? They get to go first. They know what they're going to say. They're expecting a certain kind of response, and then they know what to say after, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Using a caucus, you can interrupt that so that you can both have a strategy to respond to this, but also then know what you guys want to ask and what you want to ask of your, of the boss. So hopefully that's kind of some of the understandings of caucuses. I know it's a weird term. It's not something that we're used to, but it's just like a timeout. You're just like, timeout. Let me huddle up with my coworker. We're going to get on the same page. We're going to come up with a game plan. We're going to take away some of the momentum away from the boss, and then we're going to re-enter on equal footing.
Looks like we had two quick questions, maybe one first from Eli, and then we can go to Lucy. But Eli, if you want to unmute yourself and if you want to start by introducing yourself, to share where you work, where you're from, and what's your question?
Hi, my name is Eli. I work River Valley Co-op, which is a grocery store just outside of Springfield or Northampton, Springfield, Massachusetts area with UFCW 1459 Western Mass in Vermont. One was this come up in the last workshop as well. I just wanted to clarify. It's like a little technical thing, but when a worker asks for Weingarten rights and they ask for a specific steward, well, I guess it's two-parter. Is the worker or the manager going to go find that steward? And if that steward's not available, but another steward is there, what's the order of like, does the manager come back and say, this is not available, but these people are here? Or is the manager allowed to choose another steward? And then obviously if no one's there, then it's definitely delayed. Where the choosing of the steward, kind of how does that work? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. I feel like we talked a little bit about this in our previous training school. So I guess I'm happy to answer it. But Caitlin, you tell me if you have any other things you would want to add. The short of it is, yes, you have a right to a steward, but you don't have a right to the specific steward that you want. And I've never seen a boss take the initiative to go out of their way to contact any steward or union reps, who are like paid staff. You have to kind of know who the rep is. Usually when you're onboarding, and especially this is true if you don't have onboarding as part of your contract, you want to give every single person who's new to the store some sort of document that's, a little card usually, or something like this that has like the name of a steward or a union rep, the contact information for them, and the specific phrase that you want to say when you're invoking your wine garden rights. So that way you can directly contact them yourself. Now, if that rep isn't available or that particular one isn't available, but someone else is, and they're available to do it, then the boss is going to say, this is the steward, you have your wine garden rep, and you're just going to have to go with what you got. If nobody is available, then like you said, you have to wait. So, and you should assert your right to delay. And if you try and get in touch with someone, but they don't pick up or something like this, just be like, hey, they're not available right now, but let's reschedule this and I'll let you know as soon as they are. And I think it's good if you as a worker can kind of own that part of contacting and getting in touch with the union, because it portrays strength. It indicates like, you know your rights, you know who you need to contact, you know what you need to do. You're not asking the boss for anything, is my perspective.
Yeah, I think Justice though is totally right. So to summarize, because yeah, there was some confusion about this in the last session. As a member, you have first pick in the union representative of your choice. So that could be your steward, that could be your union rep. And if you have multiple stewards in your store, you might have a preference for one steward that you want to represent you over the other. So let's say that your steward of preference, her name is Annie, and the steward you maybe have personal beef with, you don't get along with so well. Their name is Caitlin. Just pick myself so I don't accidentally pick someone's name. So I get called into the office. I'm the member. I'm getting called into the office. They're saying, "Hey, I just want to ask you a couple questions about something that happened the other day." But I have a feeling that this is going to lead to disciplinary action. That something I don't know what I did, but the way they're talking to me, their tone, even though they haven't said it's a disciplinary meeting yet, I have a feeling it could lead to discipline. So before I say anything, I say, "I want my steward. Is Annie here? I want Annie to represent me." Um, let's say Annie is not working that shift, but Caitlin, the second steward, is working that shift. If I say I want Annie, and they're like, "Well, Annie's not working right now; she's not here," and I, double check the schedule to make sure they're not lying, and I'm like, "Oh shoot, okay, Annie's not working today, but Caitlin is working today." Caitlin might be the steward that's representing me. I could also say, let's say they say, "Okay, Annie's not here." I say, "Can I call my union rep and see if they can represent me in the meeting?" If you call your union rep, they don't pick up, Caitlin's going to represent you in that meeting. If you call your rep and they say, "Yeah, I'm on my way," or they're already in the store for some reason, they can represent you in the meeting. You could also do that in reverse order. You ask for your rep first, and then your steward. But if the only steward, there is a steward on duty, and the steward is Caitlin, and I don't really want Caitlin to represent me, I'm probably not going to be able to stall the meeting and get it rescheduled just because the steward of my personal preference isn't working right now or isn't available right now. In most cases, like kind of got your pick up into a point of kind of reasonableness. You're not going to be able to postpone the meeting forever just because your favorite steward's not available, or like you guys don't even work the same shifts. I also see a great comment from Frances in the chat. She said, "This is why, as a steward, I give all my coworkers my number so they can contact me about any questions or concerns." So two things from the chat. One comment from Heath said, "When I'm telling people about their wine garden rights, I always tell them that what's important is if they feel the management interaction could lead to discipline, then they should invoke their rights. Regardless of if management just says, 'Oh, it's just a quick conversation, it's going to be fine.' Managers can and will abuse that sentiment. So it matters as long as you feel you need to invoke it, you should invoke your rights." And then Gus has said something similar, something that's tripped members up is the difference between a purely disciplinary meeting and an investigatory meeting where a worker is being asked questions. Tell coworkers that if they start being asked questions or prompted to talk about their conduct at work, they should immediately ask for a steward. Now we're going to go through some scenarios. So we have two different scenarios that we're going to talk through together as a group. And we'll discuss, how you would deal with these different situations as a steward. So scenario a supervisor tells you to use equipment that you know is unsafe. You refuse the instruction and explain why it would be unsafe and a violation of your contract and of OSHA. The supervisor rolls their eyes and they walk away, saying that they'll ask someone else to do it. What would you do in this situation? Yeah, Matt.
I won't do it. Don't use that equipment. It's not safe. It's not safe for my members.
Hey, this is Andrea from Local 700 in Indiana. I actually just kind of had this problem. My dock plate was really, it wouldn't stay closed, or it would just keep popping up. And I told them that, and I put it in a text message, and I also contacted my rep. And within a day, they had someone fix it because they were kind of hauling around like, "Well, I guess I'll put it on the hub and stuff like that. No, you need to put it on the hub now as an emergency. So, I mean, I always make sure I put it in, like, I have evidence that I texted them and let them know that, hey, they need to get this fixed right now.
Mark in the chat says document the date, time, witnesses, get a grievance filed, and file an OSHA complaint. Let's say I'm going to add a little bit of a wrench here. So your supervisor rolls their eyes, they walk away, and they say, I'm going to ask someone else to do it. Let's say you then see your manager go over and ask someone else to do it, and they're like, sure, I guess. What would you do in this scenario where you see your coworker potentially starting to do work that might be unsafe? Yeah, Angela?
Okay, I've actually done this and I've run over and interjected and been like, nope, absolutely not. Nobody is doing this. This is unsafe, period. Like it's not me, not anybody else. It is unsafe working conditions. They're not doing it.
All right, so to summarize or recap what people shared, so you can refuse the work, you can help your coworkers know how to refuse the work, emphasizing over and over again, the reason I'm refusing the work is because it is unsafe. File a grievance, contact OSHA, document everything, and report it, keep your rep involved. Document what I'm going to read out from the chat. Document what was said, report it to your rep, find the manager, find who the manager may be looking for next, to advise them to also document and refuse. Okay.
I just want to say, in response to Kristen's response of flipping them off or saying to fuck off, just to know that you don't want to dig a hole deeper than what you can climb out of. Like, you will have the most receptive audience in the world if you just assert that this is a violation of our rights and our contract. It's unsafe. I feel unsafe doing this, etc. But if you use certain terminology or use certain gestures, it might make your audience less receptive. And you have to think of your audience being like an NLRB adjudicator, but also your other coworkers. You can say all sorts of things in closed rooms with, over drinks later, but you got to try to maintain a composure and set a strong example. That's part of the responsibility of being, an activist within your union, a steward, or any kind of representative.
Mm-hmm. We'll also talk in a second in a couple slides about the equality principle. So we'll get into some of the details on this too. Equality principle is a rule that fluctuates in all sorts of different NLRB case law. But the basic principle of it is that as a shop steward, when you're acting in your authority as a steward, whether you're representing a member in a Weingarten rights meeting, or you're helping a member take on a safety issue, filing a grievance or investigating a grievance, you are on equal footing with management. So you have just as much authority in that moment as your store management. They can't treat you as their inferior. They can't threaten you with impacting your working conditions or moving you to a different department or a different shift. You are on equal footing with them. Does that mean that you should come right out the gates and cuss them out? Probably not. Would the NLRB defend you in that situation? They're different case law. Really depends on who's in power over the NLRB at the time. There are some cases where members have gotten away with swearing, or stewards have gotten away with swearing at their management. Other cases where that hasn't gone down so well. So one of the things we had talked about on a previous stewards training session, to let your store management swear first. Find a way to represent yourself and your coworkers that is firm, but still respectful, and not just get your case thrown out because you started cussing. All right, so the next, let's say we're in the same situation. Supervisor's telling you to use equipment that you know is unsafe. You refuse the instruction, explain why it would be unsafe, a violation of your contract and of OSHA. Now the supervisor gets angry and they accuse you of being insubordinate by refusing to follow a direct instruction. What would you do?
I would call my union president and say, here, tell him. If not, I would document, take pictures and videos, and then file my grievance.
If you have other people around you, especially people who you can trust, right, to just say, hey, can you take out your phone? Are you seeing what they're saying right now? Like, can we just get some documentation about what's happening, And sometimes that's what pisses off a boss much more, is when multiple workers start to form together and cause a scene, right? Especially if they're prone to exploding temper tantrums already. So you might get some really good footage out of that, just lean on the fact that you are not alone, and that, even if they're trying to intimidate you, you're just one person. That there are many people who would also refuse
My
this order.
rep
right?
has said, you obey now and we grieve later.
Comply now, grieve later is a common phrase that people may have heard before, which is often when, there are workplace issues that you don't like. Let's say you're being forced into overtime. Maybe that's a violation of your contract, forced overtime, but management is telling you to do it anyways. Or you're being brought to a different department, and that's a violation of your contract language protecting members from being put to work in other departments that they're not trained in your mind, that might fall under the comply now, grieve later category. For work that you feel is truly unsafe, like it would cause you direct bodily harm. Let's say it's like, really unsafe equipment. It's like a splicer that is broken somehow, that you could see your finger getting chopped off. How would you kind of interpret comply now, grieve later? And would that apply? Do you feel like this would apply in this case?
During COVID, right before it came to the US, we kept on saying, how about if it does come here, what measures are we taking? And we spoke to our pharmacy director, and they're like, oh, we got it, and always would brush us off. Every time we spoke to them and brushed them off, we documented. And sent out emails and saying, we have, per our conversation on this day at this time, this is what happened. And the director saying that it's under control. Okay. Finally, COVID hits. And all of a sudden, I work at the mail order pharmacy. So we have 3 shifts, about 300 people in that pharmacy. So with that being said, it was so to the point where we were in contact with my rep, and we wanted all to walk out, but we couldn't walk out until our union president would call the union attorneys, and give us a letter of us walking out for them not keeping us safe. So we did wait. We got the letter, and we went to every union member and said, this is the letter that the union said, if you feel that you're unsafe, you have a right to walk out and your job will be protected. Almost 90% of the staff walked out. There was still like a couple hours left in our shift. So that was really detrimental. Finally, we went to arbitration, and actually we won our case, and it was ruled that Kaiser failed to keep their employees safe. So that's just something I wanted to share. And that director was removed from our pharmacy.
I want to read out some of the suggestions from the chat. So Mark said, I would bring a coworker as a witness and tell them to state the order again and explain why it's unsafe. Use my right to refuse unsafe work. Bring in others to get them involved as witnesses. Some other comments from the chat say document everything and report. And Mary says in the chat, we might often hear comply now, grieve later, but when it's a safety issue, do you really want to get hurt now? And
Grieve now, comply later. Let's say the situation's happening and you see them going to somebody else, or even they're just asking you. Does it also maybe make sense to add on, this work is unsafe. It's an OSHA violation, so I refuse to do it. Can you assign me, please assign me something different, something safer, or please assign them something safer. And almost like give the manager like depends on the manager, but like a reasonable off ramp of like, and here's the easy way out. If you don't want this to get, any worse right now, just give them something safe.
yeah, exactly. That you're not refusing to work at all, and you're not being asked to be sent home. You want to work, you just want to work safely. Now that we've gone through a couple of these scenarios, we're going to break down the different tactics that management might be using. So I'm going to pass it back to Justice to walk us through some of these first 2 tactics.
There are many, many, many different tactics and variations of these. So some of these may seem familiar, some of them not, but I'm sure you'll see them all if you work long enough, especially as a union rep or a Weingarten rep. Okay, so supervisors use specific tactics to frustrate union efforts to on the shop floor and in the office. Recognizing and countering these strategies is critical. The first one is the stalling tactic. So this strategy is designed to make you wait. Your supervisor never replies to your request for a meeting or fails to answer your first step grievance. Employers stall for all sorts of different reasons, but the bottom line is that your request action for some sort of action is being ignored. I came to management with a clear seniority violation in our schedule. The manager said they didn't know what to do about it, and that they'll take care of it, and please don't file a grievance. And then the exact same thing happens the following week, and then you get absolutely no further information. Why did they stall? What's their motivation? Well, it's kind of like a game of chicken. They're trying to keep our morale down, create frustration, make members feel like the union doesn't actually solve their problems and that it's not worth fighting, and get us to, cow out. So what we need to do to counter this stalling is first notes and documentation. That documentation is so critical, including dates, times, details of whether it's a verbal or a written response. I'd also say if there were any witnesses, to include that as well. Stay professional. If the request is ignored, put it again. They're trying sometimes to make you escalate and lose your cool. And so it's very important to maintain your cool and just reassert. I asked, just following it up, like I mentioned this thing about the seniority. Is there any further information about that, right? If your second request is ignored and now you have 2 documented instances, then you put it in writing and send copies to the boss and the supervisor's boss. Try and make that person who is deliberately ignoring you feel pressure from their boss. And also, I would say get copies to the union as well, so that they're aware of what's going on as well, to put more pressure on them. And then if there's like a grievance involved, just be aware that the boss might be trying to make you miss certain time limits that are in your contract. That's why you want to really know your contract. You need to know, sometimes you're waiting maybe 1 week to follow up. Sometimes you need to follow up later that day or within the next day so that you can meet that time limit. And then document any actions and inform the union about it. Follow your local's procedure to avoid missing those deadlines. And make the issue known to your coworkers and have an organizing plan to escalate. That's again, kind of going on the offensive. Because if they're stalling, you need to know what you need to do next to call their bluff of, that they don't know about this. So once you kind of are aware of what's going on, you also need to be thinking about who else might be affected by this. We talked about the seniority on the schedule thing. Who else is going to be impacted by this? Try and get as much evidence as possible and then start to come up with a plan of what you're going to do next. The second tactic is kind of a blowout. This is kind of the opposite of the stalling, maybe. Sometimes, again, stalling is a part of it, but the bigger thing is that rather than trying to ignore you, they're actually trying to make you lose your temper, especially inside of a grievance meeting, knowing that target audience of some sort of NLRB judge, adjudicator. You may be ridiculed, you may be ignored or yelled at. Sometimes the boss directly targets the grievant and uses inflammatory remarks about, the character, etc. So as an example, we had a supervisor who was doing bargaining unit work. I made myself visible and documented her violating their contract, and she flipped out on me in front of 2 coworkers. And when we heard the grievance and the evidence was on our side, she lost it again, and we just kept our cool. So why does the company do this? What's their motivation? Well, they're trying to disorient you. They're trying to disrupt your note-taking, your documentation, things that will become later more relevant than what's happening in this exact moment. They're also trying to scare you. They're trying to intimidate you and bully not just you, but other coworkers who may also be grievance in this. They're trying to insert their dominance over the union to say, look, here's your representative, but they can't even handle a single meeting, right? You need to start with the caucusing, using that as going in with a clear head to say, even if this is a total shock, which usually if it's a grievance meeting, you'll have heads up awareness and come up with a strategy going in beforehand. But if it's just a Weingarten meeting or something like this, you're gonna use your caucus so you know what to expect. You can encourage your coworkers as well to keep their cool, again, leading by example, maintaining your composure, sticking to your game plan. Don't let them distract you from what you're there to do. And then if things escalate, pause again, take another caucus. If suddenly they're trying to dig at, maybe they notice that one of the people in the room is getting a little irked, and they keep mentioning something and they keep upsetting them. And you can see that in your coworkers' eyes. Call the caucus, get together, regroup, right? That's when you got to be like, put your hand on the shoulder and say, like, I know they're trying to get under your skin. Do not let them, right? And then know the equality principle. So the NLRB goes back and forth on this all the time. It's not like absolute, but in general, when you're in your capacity as a steward, you are on equal footing with management. And management is your equal, not your boss in that moment. So that means you can be firm. If they are trying to distract you or ignoring something or just misconstruing something, you have every right to challenge them and say, what are you basing that on? When you're in those meetings, you can say, where in the contract does it say that we have to do this X, Y, or Z? You have the right to just immediately call them out on that. And sometimes it's kind of a power dynamic between you and the boss with your coworkers, where they maybe don't know as much as both you and your boss. So you really got to assert your right to be equal with them. And the last thing is just document anything that could be actual harassment or threats, because that's just not going to look good in front of a ULL. So that's where it's like you want to document that and identify any witnesses, and if necessary, you can file a ULP over that.
Awesome. Thanks, Justice. So I'm going to go through the last two tactics. And like Justice said, there are plenty more, so we're only covering just the tip of the iceberg. But the next tactic is divide and conquer. So this is when the boss tries to pit members against each other. And this is actually one of the things that someone shouted out in the chat at the very beginning when we were doing the sticky notes. So why does the company do divide and conquer? What's their goal? What's their motivation? Well, the company wants to make the union weaker and they want to take advantage of the members. So for example, let's say a department is totally understaffed. There aren't enough people to get all the work done. Probably this is a familiar example to many of you. And management says, well, it's because this person called out and that person called out. And if they just showed up on time and did their jobs and wanted to come to work, this wouldn't be a problem. It's Caitlin's fault for calling out all the time and going out with her friends. So that she's lazy and if people just wanted to work harder, this wouldn't be an issue. So management uses divide and conquer all the time. They might pick on different groups that already exist in your workplace, like different language groups or people are from different places. They might try to kind of build on those divisions. And people mentioned at the beginning of the training, you might have a boss that's racist or bigoted who wants to kind of pull on some of those divisions in the workplace. And as union activists, as stewards and active members in the union, we want to counter divide and conquer. So there are a couple ways to do this. First way, know your contract in and out. Management often creates divisions by violating the contract and then blaming it on someone else. So management is trying to violate the contract as much as humanly possible and hoping that they're not going to get away with it, hoping that you are not going to read your contract, that your coworkers don't know your contract, and that no one's going to actually enforce the contract. So they're creating the divisions by violating the contract, by making your workplace more difficult and your working conditions worse, and then blaming it on each other instead of recognizing that actually your contract's there to protect you, and you and your coworkers can come together and enforce your contract by knowing your contract. Some other tactics: don't allow disagreements between members to surface in front of management. If you as a steward can find a way to help your coworkers resolve conflict or resolve problems kind of outside and away from management, that's really great. Bringing issues to management may only fuel the fire when it comes to the divide and conquer tactic. So if you and your coworkers can present a united front, deal with your issues separately, try to mediate things as best you can. Obviously, if things escalate to a super high level and it starts getting dangerous or uncomfortable, maybe you don't want to just keep trying to handle everything on your own. But I would think about how you and your coworkers can build unity on the shop floor, not make your disagreements and personal beefs so obvious to management if you have them. Keep discussions among members private, outside of management's earshot. And the most important one, I think, is to build solidarity, build true solidarity in your shops. If people get along, the divide and conquer tactic's not going to work very well. So get people together for social events, for drinks or food before or after work. If your union has social events for union members, invite your coworkers to go out to maybe, some locals will organize a baseball outing or just drinks once a month. Invite your coworkers to union events and union meetings and activities. Make the union fun and make a space for your coworkers to get together outside of work and build solidarity with one another, rather than, just relying on all of the tension that kind of comes up on the job. And then the last one is the trade, or horse trading. So this tactic involves management trying to get something before they give something. So they might ask you to drop one grievance to settle another. So for example, let's say you go in with a seniority violation, management starts bringing up some potential discipline, trying to get you to drop the seniority violation. So you're trying to enforce the contract, but they start raising, this time that you were late for 2 minutes. Why does management encourage the trade? Well, they want you to back off contract enforcement entirely, and they want to start cutting deals to undermine the agreement and to undermine solidarity, and truly to kind of undermine the spirit of the union, which is members coming together, enforcing the contract, standing up for each other. And instead, they want to kind of turn it into these kind of backroom deals, agreements, handshake agreements, where they can avoid members using their collective power in the job and instead just get everything done under the table. So to counter the trade, you can pursue all grievances on their merit, stay focused on one grievance at a time. Don't let management talk you out of filing a grievance, or don't let them try to get you to drop a grievance. You have, as a steward, you may have a duty of fair representation to fairly and equally represent all of your coworkers. So if a member is going to file a grievance and suddenly you agree to drop it in exchange for something else, you may be violating the duty of fair representation, which is not good. Don't sacrifice one member's issue for another. So again, talk to duty of fair representation. Avoid setting a precedent that weakens the union. Horse trading and trading in general weakens the union. The union is strengthened by solidarity and the power that workers can build together. It's weakened by individual backroom wheeling and dealing between people and smoking cigars. Involve members in union action. Horse trading works best in the dark. So when you can bring problems to the forefront and out in public, it's going to be a lot harder for management to try to get you to drop a grievance if everyone knows that this grievance was filed and they care about the outcome. They're invested in the outcome.
Right after this, but so we talked about our scenario is like we have that supervisor who is the overcommitter. They're like, oh, don't worry, I'm gonna get to it, and there's like some sort of equipment that was broken that we had to replace in order to do our jobs. I think it was Kristen who had the idea of like a cart that's necessary to get like prescription medicine from A to B. And, the idea was, okay, first, I mean, what Kristen initially suggested was like, well, this is not our problem. I mean, we're trying to get the equipment, but we don't have it. So, I mean, what do you want us to do? Like, that's their problem, not our problem. But I wanted to counter that can sometimes play into some of the divide and conquer strategy of the management if you're not taking your due diligence to like document what's going on and communicate it and follow up. It's absolutely true what you're saying. And yet at the same time, if you don't actively communicate like the entirety of the situation, it's very easy for other people to blame you for not doing your job instead of recognizing the bigger picture, right? So making sure that everybody's on the same page, and then maybe emailing or asking for the communication like for the supervisor above our supervisor to be like, yeah, at what step did things break down? Like, we asked you initially X, Y, Z times and nothing's happened. So like, should we ask the person above you? Maybe if we all kind of ask together, that will help you, like trying to do that to get around some of what the barriers you are. And then actually, I think it was, I forget your name, but there was someone in our group that was mentioning they had filed a grievance over an issue similar to like this with a scheduling issue, and they had gotten an admission of wrongdoing from the boss that their overcommitting kind of supervisor was also just not doing their job and not getting them the information they need. And yet a year later, they're in the same spot. And so I think when it comes to that, then it's like, okay, we got to move along the escalation ladder. Like sometimes the grievance is not enough. The grievance is very important because it shows that we are trying to do things through the contract in the process that we have set up. But if it's not solution, then maybe you call out sick all on the same day, or, you get a petition out to some of the patients who are like being impacted by this, talk about this issue and have a plan to impact the profits, because if it's the perspective of the company is that this one supervisor is causing them to lose profits, that supervisor will not last long, right? And that's what you got to do, is kind of move in a way so that you're getting to the audience that you need.
I will. Dylan was the supervisor and I was the steward. And Dylan was actually really good. Well, I mean, not actually, like, I don't know him from Adam, but like he threw me off just in the scenario with trying to spin it from, we were doing the friendly thing and like, oh, don't bring anybody in. Can't we just be friends? And then, hey, you want to go party? And like, he was really good at disarming me. But I think we did really good at role playing it and showing, that friends are friends and work's work. And like, obviously, yeah, you do have so much going on. So I'm just going to take this off your plate and file the grievance.
One of the things that, Angela, I thought you did really good in the example was that Dylan was trying to distract you and change the subject by, being like, oh, how was your party last weekend? And I think you did a very good job at just like staying on track, don't get sidetracked. Like you didn't even answer the question. You were just kind of like, look, I'm here to talk to you about this issue. I'm not just representing myself as your friend, I'm also representing my coworkers. And I think you did a good job also centering some of your coworkers, so it's not just about you.
But I was with Mason, who was the grievant, Deborah, who was the steward, and Christina, who was the supervisor. And one thing we talked about Mason using a straddle stacker, a pit equipment without being certified, and the manager asking them to do that. Christina was playing the role of being passive aggressive. And one thing she talked about was bribery. Like, I guess I don't have to deal with that as much. So, she offered to buy Mason lunch or something if he used the stacker without being certified. And Mason calmly told her no. He stayed calm. Deborah stayed calm. Deborah came in and questioned the situation, asking for training going forward. And I'm trying to quickly do this. Sorry. Oh, we talked about how unsafe it was, telling her, how unsafe it was. And I think that's really all I got.